Let me give you one example. Today it was announced that a KC-135, a fuel tanker that is used to refuel combat aircraft like the F-35, that it crashed. Don't ask any more questions. It just crashed. It wasn't shot down. It crashed. Okay, look, most Americans above the age of 15 understand that planes can crash on takeoff because, say, an engine burns out, they got too heavy, something. So it crashes on takeoff. It can crash on landing because there's been something mechanically wrong with the plane, like the nose gear won't come down, etc. But normally, planes aren't just flying along in the sky and then crash. So they suddenly plunge to the earth. Well, what the Department of War is not telling you is that plane was shot down. And there was another KC-135 following behind that saw the surface-to-air missile that took the plane out. They saw it fired, and the plane behind was able to take evasive action to avoid having itself shot down. So that plane was down by an air defense system. Well, the Pentagon doesn't want to say that, or, they don't want to. My God, we'd have to admit that they haven't completely suppressed all air defense systems and that there are still vulnerabilities out there. And moreover, to make it worse, this now brings the total dead up to 14 from combat. You see, if it was just an accident, they wouldn't get caught as combat. It was a terrible accident. Well, it wasn't. They're lying about that. They're lying about the total number of casualties. We saw a week ago, Wednesday, that the Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, it is northwest of Stuttgart, issued a memo telling basically pregnant women that were expecting to give birth at that hospital, forget about it. It's closed for obstetric services. So obstetricians were, no longer working there because they, quote, had to focus on its primary mission. Well, what's its primary mission? They didn't say so in the memo, but the primary mission is the Combat Casualty Collection Center, where combat casualties, and once they get immediate treatment at a field hospital, they're flown to Landstuhl for treatment to get stabilized. And then once they're stabilized, they're then flown from Landstuhl to Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland, where they're then taken to Walter Reed Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, just off of Wisconsin Avenue. So that's what was going on last week. And in fact, the nearby Army base, Kaiserslautern, they issued a notice, was put in an advertisement in the Stars and Stripe, a newspaper, military newspaper, was asking for, hey, we need lots of blood donors. Please come over and start donating blood. I need blood donors. Well, because you have a lot of casualties coming out of the Middle East, out of the Persian Gulf. And then in addition to that, you've had at least 7 different medevac flights since last week. So you're getting one medevac flight about every 2 days. So it's not an incredibly heavy casualty count, like in terms of every day, but it's still big enough that you've had to have 7 flights. And I'm sure they do a flight for just 1 or 2 people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, Larry, this is why we're having you on the channel, because I think right now, when we have a war, there's always what we call the fog of war, right? You don't know exactly what's happening. There's certainly what's happening on the ground, what the media is reporting to you, and then what our insiders and what geopolitical, insiders like yourself are really able to report and be able to come back. And I do understand that. And I just want to bring up here, let's bring up this slide, because this actually came out on CNN today, is that the Trump administration underestimated Iran's war impact on the Strait of Hormuz. This is the biggest headline that's coming out today as the time of a recording. And Larry, I wanted to get your thoughts on this, because it's now the media is reporting this, is that the Trump administration did not anticipate that Iran would actually be able to close the Strait of Hormuz. This has been a very big developing story, because obviously we've seen the oil market over the last week has been so erratic, been going up and down. Also, Scotty Bessent in the U.S. Treasury has now unsanctioned all Russian oil which is quite interesting because now, that's a big move from the U.S. government to unsanction Russian
Right.
oil. Obviously, that means that we're having strategic low reserves of oil, and this has got to be a huge win for Putin. Would you agree with this? Is really Russia and Putin kind of the biggest beneficiary of this war so far?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Putin's raking in the dough. So recall that before the war started, Russia was selling oil at roughly $59 a barrel. Now it's getting close to $90 to $100 a barrel. It's been estimated that Putin's making over $150 million. Russia's getting over $150 million a day. That's going to add up pretty quick. They're going to be at $1 billion in 10 days, $2 billion in 20 days, in a month. So, raking in a new $3 billion a month, that's not bad. But it's important to understand what happened when the Iranian Revolutionary Guard shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and they did that day one, on the very day that they were attacked with what's called a war of aggression. The same crime, it's a crime. That's what the Nazis were prosecuted for at Nuremberg, starting a war of aggression. Iran shut down the strait. And in closing the strait, it wasn't just oil. There are three major commodities that come out of there. In addition to oil, liquid natural gas primarily comes from Qatar. That represents 25% of the global supply. United States is the largest supplier in the United States, and then Russia, and I think Qatar is like third. And in addition to that, urea. And you're going, well, nitrogen, what? That represents fertilizer.
Yes.
The Persian Gulf accounts for 35% of fertilizer on the global market. Wow. So right now, you've now had 14 days of closure of the Persian Gulf. The products are not getting out. And as a result, yes, we're seeing a dramatic spike in the oil market. The Brent is up over $100 now. And Trump has been trying to jawbone it down. But, no, this war is going to end soon. No, it's not. But people believed him, and so they said, this is going to end soon, so we'll be back to normal. No, it's not going to be back to normal for a long while. It could be as long as 6 months, maybe shorter. But it all depends on how long it's going to take the United States and Israel to come to recognize they're going to have to cut a deal with Iran, a deal that right now they find completely unpalatable, but one that Iran's going to insist on. And the West is not going to have a choice. We don't have a military option to open up the Strait of Hormuz, despite what Pete Hegseth says. Not one that is going to be politically palatable, not one that can be conducted without suffering severe losses. There's talk now circulating that they're going to send a Marine contingent to land on one of the little islands that's there in the Persian Gulf. Well, hasn't anybody paid attention to what happens to units like 2,500 man units in Ukraine? You don't see them collected together. You see them spread out. Why? Because of the FPV drones, which hunt them down and kill them. Right. So if the United States is dumb enough to deploy U.S. troops on one of those islands, they are going to be decimated with Iranian drones, not to mention missiles and artillery. They can also reach those locations. This is Trump. Robert Barnes was just on with Danny Davis, and he's in contact with people within the Trump administration at high levels. Okay, they think Trump's gone crazy. That literally he is mentally not compos mentis, and so we've got a situation where the 25th Amendment should be enacted, but so far, because of the pressure from the Zionists, he's sticking in there. And he's going to embroil this country further into a war that's going to damage us severely. I predict at this point, because of the inflationary spiral that's going to be kicked off, it's already underway, Correct. But it's now going to grow worse. Price of diesel in the last 10 days is up a buck 40.
Right. Wow.
Gasoline, I don't know about where you live, but where I am in Bradenton, Florida, the gas, let's see, on Sunday, it was up 50 cents. By Wednesday, it was up another 15 cents to 65 cents over per gallon. And then yesterday, it went up another nickel to 70 cents. So that's just, that's in 5 days. It's up significantly. And what's particularly alarming is that price impact on diesel. I mean, that affects your groceries, everything that's transported to grocery stores, to restaurants, to Target, to Walmart, to, BJ's, Price Club, the prices are going to go up. They've got higher fuel costs just to haul those goods to those locations. So this, when you're kicking off an inflationary spiral in the United States at the same time that job losses are mounting, they're not going down. So we're faced with that nightmare scenario of stagflation, where the economy is in recession and you're faced with an inflationary spiral that you can't stop.
Yeah. I mean, well, I'm based right now in Las Vegas, Nevada, Larry, and we've seen a tremendous increase. I was driving to work today, and I think gas is around $4.40 a gallon as I was driving by my local gas station here, which is significant. I believe it was around $3.65 maybe about a week ago. So, I mean, we've seen that massive increase there. And I just want our viewers to know that, 65% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. This is really hitting a lot of people very hard. Doesn't maybe not seem like a big deal, but when you're driving a big truck around and you have to, like you said, all of the logistics of our grocery stores and restaurants, there's no other way than for these costs to be passed on. Inflation's going to increase. We saw, I think it was the jobs report just came out a couple of days ago, 92,000 jobs lost in the United States. The economic growth that just came out, it was at 0.7. So we are seeing almost the United States in a decline there with the economy. Larry, I got a big open-ended question here for you. Has the United States passed the point of no return here? Have we just really opened up a new war that we just do not have an exit ramp from?
Correct. Yes. Well, there is an exit ramp. The exit ramp is going to exceed to the demands of Iran. And Iran's demands are pretty simple. One, you got to stop all oil sanctions against us. Number two, pay reparations for all the things that you've destroyed. We can't put a dollar price on the lives of the 1,000 plus 2,000 human beings that you've killed, but you can at least try to rebuild some of the infrastructure that you've destroyed. And then three, get the hell out of the Persian Gulf. You can no longer be here in a position to threaten us and launch military operations. We don't really now have a full appreciation of the kind of damage that is being done to Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, as well as United Arab Emirates. United Arab Emirates and Qatar in particular are going to suffer the most because Dubai and Doha had become two centers for let's call it the jet set, the millionaires around the world to go live, because it was tax-free, man. It was the weather was pretty decent. And when it was hot as hell, you could at least go inside to air-conditioned comfort. They didn't realize how fragile those societies are. They're literally living on a thin lifeline. And now that the Gulf is shut, well, the food supply has been cut. So they're going to have trouble getting fresh food in there, number one. They are dependent upon desalination of water. Iran's the West thought it a good idea. U.S. or Israel attacked Iran's desalination plant, but Iran did not retaliate. In the past, if you hit their oil depot, they hit your oil depot. It'd be tit for tat. They've held off on that, and I believe the reason they've held off is they realize once they take out those desalination plants, you're going to have millions of people potentially dying of thirst. They're not going to have a source of water. It's going to create a real humanitarian crisis. So for now, Iran has avoided doing that. But the U.S. ability now to sustain military operations in the region, That's over.
Yeah.
They have to do it from other locations. So yeah, they continue to bomb the hell out of Iran. Notice one of the interesting things is they're now using B-2 bombers to drop bombs, as opposed to use the F-35s. And one of the reasons for that is they've lost a number of tankers, apart from the one that was just shot down in Iraq. They lost at least 5 others at the Prince Sultan Air Base. So you've had a significant loss of these tankers that are needed to fuel the aircraft to get them to and from the border with Iran.
Yeah. There, I just want to add this. I'm going to add in a graph here. We actually have, this is from the New York Times, actually detailing the types of vessels that have been hit each day. You can see very early in this conflict, Iran was certainly going after the tankers. Then it's kind of switched to the bulk carriers, container ships. You've seen recently in the last couple of days, a very large increase really in the bulk carriers, the container ships, and like you mentioned, the tankers. So looking at this graph of what, the type of vessels have been hit successfully, I mean, it's quite remarkable that they're able to do this. I'd like to get, more from the military perspective, because I know this is your area of expertise as a CIA analyst. And I wanted you to talk a little bit more about the weapons that are in play right now, what Iran still has left, what they're doing, and how the United States and Israel are really combating that. Are we in a position where the U.S. and Israel, are we running out of ammo? Are we running out of munitions to really continue this conquest?
Well, look, so let's separate the offensive from the defensive. On the defensive side of the house, we have the Patriot missile, and we've effectively run out of those. Okay, we have no more. I don't think we have any more PAC-3 missiles. I know at least my understanding is in one of the bases, without specifying which one, has depleted its air defense load. And let's be clear that despite all the wild claims of effectiveness about the Patriot and about the THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense missile, they've actually been terribly ineffective. You can, I calculated, going back and looking at annual production numbers. So if we go back to the first year in September 2015, the United States produced, and until December 31st of 2025, the United States produced a grand total, and this is the upper end estimate. It could actually have been lower, but at least 4,620 missiles, PAC-3 missiles. When you do the math that you fire 2 PAC missiles against every incoming target, that means they're capable of engaging 2,310 missiles. So we agree on the math.
Right.
Well, they deployed some Patriots to Ukraine, and supposedly Patriots were shooting down Russian missiles. Well, Russia's fired over 12,000 ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. If the Patriots had shot down every one they were capable of, that means still about 10,000 missiles got through there.
Mm-hmm.
So we're being fed a line of, let's call it male bovine excrement, some lies about how effective these systems are. Similarly with the THAAD. The THAAD, they produce like 79, 80 of those a year at $12 to $13 million a piece. And you still have to fire 2 of those at an inbound target. So if you produce 80, you can handle 40. So far, it looks like Iran has fired well over 1,000 missiles. Well, the Patriot's been used to engage those 1,000 missiles. That's more than half of the total capacity produced since 2015. See, it doesn't make sense. So the air defense, the so-called air defense systems, they are a waste of money. They really are. They spend millions, and to be able to knock down $50,000 drones, it's ridiculous. JDAMs we're short of, my understanding, and JDAM it's a glide bomb. It's got a maximum distance of like 40 to 50 miles. So a plane drops it, it can go 40 to 50 miles and then hit a target. We do have enough. We do have quite a few JASSMs. That is another air-launched missile. That actually has a range out of around 500 miles. So
Okay.
we're not running out of those. Tomahawks, yes, we're running out of Tomahawks. We only produced 80 or 90 of those a year. And hell, I think they've launched well over 200, 300 in the course of the last 14 days. So there are certain inventories that are being drained down. And, what's being exposed is that a large amount of the U.S. defense budget has been spent on useless crap, weapon systems that, really don't make a difference on the battlefield.
Right.
And what we're going to find out, I hope and pray we don't find this out, if we go ahead with this landing of Marines on one of these islands there in the Strait of Hormuz, they will find out that they are incapable of defending against drone attacks. They will be wiped out or decimated with, anywhere of approaching 80 to 90% casualties.
Wow.
And we'll learn that the days where we could mass forces and keep them grouped up, no, those days are over. That's one of the lessons that's been learned out of the war in Ukraine over the last 4.5 years. And that's one of the reasons the war is actually progressing so slowly by some accounts, because the Russians are minimizing their casualties, they're spreading their forces out, and they're not making unnecessary risks. They're not suffering the casualties that the West claims they are, but the Ukrainians certainly are. And again, the Ukrainians have made the mistake of trying to cluster together and create a massive force when they launch an attack, and they get picked off one by one.
Right. Yeah, Larry, I've got a stat here that we'll bring in here just so our audience gets to see, how this math works. It makes sense. So the military math makes many Americans' partners shudder. Patriot intercept missiles can cost nearly $4 million each. The United States produced about 600 of them in all of 2025. And some estimates suggest that more than 1,000 have already been used in less than 2 weeks of war. Like you said, I think it's the math is not mathing, is we would say there. It doesn't make sense. I appreciate you breaking that down. All of the defense systems, the missiles that we have, and I was chatting with Colonel Douglas McGregor earlier this week, and one of the insights that he had shared was that all Iran has to do is survive right now, right? And the big part here is really obviously the United States and Israel. For them to accomplish what they want to accomplish is going to be much harder for them to do as opposed to Iran. They just need to survive. And I think the issue here, if we kind of go back to President Trump, I believe, like you said, a lot of people are really worried about what he's actually saying, his stated objectives. We've seen in the very beginning of the campaign, it was regime change. That was actually a stated goal. Very quickly, that was pivoted away. Okay, no, now we're not into regime change. It definitely seems that I think Trump does not have a clear idea of what he actually wants to accomplish. So my next question to you is, what is the United States objective at this point as we're entering into this third war? Where do we go from here, from the United States perspective? What are they actually trying to achieve?
Well, what we want, we can't get. We do want regime change so that we can have somebody in control in Iran who will obey us and allow us to take full exploitation of the oil and gas reserves that Iran has. But we're not going to get that. And we do not have the military power to force regime change. You can't do it with air power. Air power is very limited. You can't do it with sea power because the Navy doesn't dare get too close to Iranian shores for fear of getting blown out of the water. And so that leaves a ground force. Iran's got 1 million soldiers, a million between the militia, the Baji, the regular army, and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC. They got 1 million men. Well, conventional military wisdom is, if you're going to attack a force that's basically defending, you need to have a 3-to-1 to 4-to-1 advantage in manpower.
Correct.
That means we need to have 3 to 4 million. We got 472,000 soldiers in the Army worldwide. We have, I think, 110,000 Marines. So, okay, what does that get us up to? 590,000, almost 600,000. Great. All we got to do is come up with another 2.4 million people. How long will that take? And then how are they going to go into Iran? How are we going to do that? We talked about this earlier. Where do you assemble the force?
Right.
And you can't really assemble a large force. 23 years ago, we did it. When we invaded Iraq in 2003, we built up all of our forces in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. They were worried about a Scud missile coming in, but the Scuds, and one did. It did hit and cause some damage, killed some people. But by and large, troops went around their business, did exercises, did jogging. They wouldn't do that today. The drones would be hunting them down. The missiles are accurate, would take them out. So you'd have to move them, stage them in some place like Turkey, perhaps, if Turkey would cooperate. But then when it comes time for D-Day, how do you get them from Turkey to point A? I mean, moving that massive size of force is a huge logistics effort. And Iran is in a position to, knock it down and defeat it. So we really don't have a true boots on the ground solution here.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, I think that would also, I think, really galvanize a lot of the American public. I think the U.S. is probably, a lot of people are tolerant, of say, the operation to this point, because it has largely been, an air defense or an air, strategy. Certainly we have our naval vessels over there, but I think putting boots on the ground would be catastrophic for the United States. I mean,
yes.
The main point that you're saying is really logistically, like you mentioned. How do you actually get the soldiers in position in point A? Just that first step alone is a tremendous task to ask for.
Right. Yeah. So it's that's not feasible. And the people that are talking this way, they know nothing about U.S. military capabilities and nothing about logistics. I mean, let's even assume if we got troops inside Iran, how do you sustain them? How do you resupply them with ammunition, with artillery shells? And in fact, if you're going to use artillery, you got to move those artillery pieces. You need big trucks. And that means you got to have fuel. Where's the gas going to come from? And then all the while, you're assuming that Iran's not firing back. Oh, they absolutely are going to be firing back. So that's why I say the United States doesn't have a good military option to coerce Iran into doing what our will. But Iran, by virtue of controlling the Strait of Hormuz and crippling international economic activity, in the process, they're able to get countries coming to them to say, hey, can we be friends again? India just did it. I thought for sure that Iran would tell India to go to hell. But Iran, they're playing this smart. India came basically begging, be our friend. We're sorry. We should have spoken up sooner. And Iran said, okay, well, we'll work with you. You're going to pay full freight, but we'll work with you.
Right.
So Iran's going to be building relations with countries in order to, save themselves economically. But even if Iran allows all these different countries to get their oil out, it still represents a significant cutoff in the global supply. And it's not just the oil, liquid natural gas, and the fertilizer. Those three things it's a triple whammy on the global economy. But some countries are doing well. Russia raking in the cash because it's a major exporter in all three of those categories.
Right. Larry, I'd like to ask you about China because we've heard this specifically that this war is not about Iran, it's not about Israel, whatever. It's really about the United States trying to cut off China, from economically developing, and obviously a lot of the oil that does come from Iran does go to China. I'd like to get your thoughts on that hypothesis, right? The idea that this war is more about China than it is Iran. Do you buy into that? What are your thoughts?
No. This war is about securing, Israel and Israel alone. And a lot of the analysis about China it's wrong. They think, China is dependent upon oil exported from the Persian Gulf. No, it's not. It exports a large amount, but then look at its overall consumption. And within its overall consumption, it's a small amount. It's about 8%. Okay. Right. So China also produces its own oil, and in the past was exporting oil. They've now cut off those exports. So you're saving it entirely for domestic consumption. And I seem to recall there's another country in the world that I think is on the northern border of China. Country might be named Russia. And I seem to recall Russia has a little bit of oil, a little bit of natural gas. Yeah. So, and they're building pipelines. All this is going to expand and solidify the economic relations between Russia and China. The very thing that the United States spent 50 years trying to prevent. It was like that scene from Ghostbusters where you had Sigourney Weaver and Rick Moranis, and got to keep those two apart, or if they get together, oh my God, it's going to be the end of the world.
Right.
Well, that was, we've got to keep Russia and China apart. Well, we've now brought them together, and their relationship's growing stronger, not weaker. And as a consequence of that, it's weakening the U.S. position globally, both politically and economically.
Yeah. I mean, Larry, kind of to tap onto that, what you just said there, I mean, is this really, I think over the last couple of years, we've seen the new thing emerge, which is the new world order, or we should say the multipolar world, rather.
Yeah,
so a multipolar world. And I think, and it certainly was for many decades after World War II, it was a unipolar world where the United States really controlled everything, had a tremendous amount of leverage on the world. I think over the last, 5 to 7 years, we've seen a lot of acceleration to this multipolar world where a country like China is now a superpower. It's on the same level as the United States, and it wants a seat at the table. Is this really just accelerating that? I mean, can we now say that the unipolar world is dead? Here is multipolarity, and the future of our world is going to be forever changed as a result of this war?
Well, U.S. control is dead. So let's look at the top 10 banks in the world. China dominates that list. The top 10 engineering schools. China is at the top of all of those. The highest U.S. ranked engineering school on that global list, MIT, number 13. Okay.
Wow.
So number of engineers, STEM graduates, China dominates. On the most important economic categories governing production, governing industry, China outpaces the United States by, miles, if not hundreds of miles. The China controls major commodity supply chains. The United States no longer does. So China China is now in the process of becoming the economic center of the world. And partnering with China is going to be essential for countries that want to stay economically viable. There was an analysis done, there's a YouTube channel called Inside China Business, and Kevin Walmsley is he's lived in China for 15 years, and he's always providing excellent analysis. And he pointed out Elon Musk is trying to build robots that will compete with the Chinese, the humanoid robots, to do different tasks and construction. And he just shows how it's not even economically feasible for Elon. The Chinese have a significant advantage. So why China is supporting Iran really sits at a historic crossroads. Go back 2 millennium, and traders were coming across the Silk Road, and they would enter into Iran, and then they would go through Iran to eventually get to the Mediterranean. So Iran's always been an important trading crossroads, and it's still in that position. And Russia wants to turn it into a north-south corridor. So, this war in part was to serve the interests of Israel, but also probably to disrupt that economic advance. Now, 2 days ago, it looked like BRICS was going to be a disaster for BRICS. But with the announcement today that Iran is going to help India secures access to oil, that shows that there's a potential for an internal division. They're starting to address it. And I think Modi recognizes belatedly that he did a very stupid thing in sucking up to Israel, trying to suck up to the United States, he now realizes they're losers. They are going to lose.
Yeah, and I think, well, for the Indians, I mean, they're one of the faster growing economies in the world. So,
Correct.
you know, for Modi as the prime minister, you've got to do everything you can to support that economy, which is securing your access to oil, right? I mean, it's a backbone of the economy. It's going to be a major driver, and so I think it's an interesting one because we've always seen a role from India as always being trying to play both sides, right? They wanted to be in BRICS, but they wanted to also maintain a good relationship with the United States, kind of this dual approach, if you will. And so, but I think at the end of the day, when your economy is one of the fastest growing in the world, and you need to have oil to grow that economy, you're going to strike a deal. And I guess that's where we're going to see, like you had just predicted, a lot more countries coming to the table to do a deal with the Iranians because they're going to have to get access to that oil,
right,
and other resources from the strait, which you had pointed out.
Yeah, this is the economic disruption of this. Still, the markets are in denial. Though I'd looked earlier, and the U.S. stock market crashed today again, down another 120 points. Remember, when Pam Bondi, was it 3 weeks ago, was bragging, or was it 4 weeks ago? Well, the stock market's at 50,000. Well,
Right.
Stock markets now on the Dow Jones is at 46,500. Gee, that's 3,500 points down in 3 weeks. That's not good.
It's not good, and I think there's also like an asterisk there because there was some analysis that talked about the stock market in the United States and actually compared it to other developing countries around the world. And I think as of last year, the Trump administration wanted to tout, okay, we've had this amazing year. The Dow is approaching 50,000. Everybody is winning. This is the golden age of America. But actually, when you look at it compared to other countries and other stock markets, the United States ranked 21st out of 23 developed countries around the world. Right. So, there's yes, okay, we can say that the Dow is approaching 50,000. And interesting enough, that interview, she was actually asked about the Epstein files and said, well, actually, who cares? Because the Dow is at 50,000. That's what you guys should be writing about. That's what we need to be talking about. But of course, now all of a sudden, Trump is losing a major point of his presidency, which of course was the success of the stock market and everything. Larry, we're coming to the end of our time here, and I just love your insights because it's just raw, it's unfiltered, it's the insights that we can't get on Western media. This is why we have YouTube channels. This is why we have independent journalism. So I want to just ask you another broad question here. What is the biggest miscalculation that the West has made about Iran up until this point?
That Iran is a radical extremist group of Muslims committed to terrorism and violence. That in and of itself is the biggest lie. When you go back and look at the history, the fact that even though the United States encouraged Saddam Hussein to start the war with with Iran in September of 1980, Jimmy Carter was still president. Zbigniew Brzezinski was his national security advisor. You then, in 1983, the Reagan administration continued that support. And a guy named Don Rumsfeld, you may have heard of him.
Correct.
He was meeting with Saddam Hussein. He was one of the conduits for providing Iraq with the chemical precursors used to produce chemical weapons of mass destruction that were used against Iran. It was during this period, that started in August of 83, and it continued for 6 years and ended in August of 1988. During those 6 years of being attacked with chemical weapons that were provided essentially by the West, Iran never reciprocated in kind. They did not develop chemical weapons. They did not use chemical weapons. And the reason they didn't is because the Ayatollah Khomeini at the time, again, thought it was a sin. This was before Khomeini declared that Iran wouldn't build a nuclear weapon. But Iran didn't go down that road. They saw that as sin. So you get quite a different picture than is painted. Right. Iran, as a Shia-dominated Muslim republic, has a completely different attitude compared to the Sunni extremists, the Al-Qaedas, the folks that were part of ISIS. Their version of Islam stipulates that only they have the truth, and that everybody else who does not adhere to their truth are apostates and must be killed. That's why those Sunni extremists had been killing Shia Muslims for many years. That is why under Soleimani, General Soleimani, the Iranians went into Syria to support Bashar al-Assad against Al-Qaeda, ISIS, al-Nusra, radical Islamic sects that were attacking Shia Muslims as being not real Muslims, as well as Alawites, another version of Islam, as well as Christians. So, that's that understanding that big lie that Iran is not the number one sponsor of terrorism. Iran, in fact, you can look at all of the so-called terrorist acts attributed to Iran have been reactions to what the United States was doing to Iran, reactions to U.S. attacks on Iran. And they've been, but at the same time, as we saw, and I mentioned with the desalinization plant, even though we hit their desalinization plant, Iran did not respond in kind because they recognized the potential damage it would do and a needless death for other Muslims in the region, even though they're Sunni Muslims.
Correct. Oh, that's a fantastic insight, Larry. I want to say thank you for bringing the historical context, and they're always going back all the way back to the early 1980s with Jimmy Carter in office, Reagan. I mean, this is why I think it's really important that we study history to understand, the context behind this. Even going back to Donald Rumsfeld giving the supplies to Saddam Hussein, which then was used as chemical weapons, and all of these things. I mean, this is the context that we don't often hear, and I think this is why we have this YouTube channel so that we can educate more people and we can try to understand the world around us. Larry, I want to just let you have the final words here, and I'd just like I ask you, how do we find your work? I think you have your own YouTube channel. You also have a Substack. I'd like to hear you to tell that to our audience so that they could follow along and continue to get your amazing insights.
Yeah, you can find me at at YouTube. I'm at a place called Countercurrents. I post about one video a week there. So it's not a lot of activity. My main platform is sonar21.com, a blog, but I also have a Substack that is Larry C. Johnson, Sonar21. So you can search on that. And that's been growing. I think I've got about 11,000 subscribers, not all paid, only a small number paid, but that's okay. I feel it's more important to get the information out that people get it.
Absolutely.
Because as you said, look, what happened in 1980, I think you were probably born somewhere in that period, so you don't remember it.
Correct.
But, I was just getting late 20s, early 30s then. So I do remember it. And it was, historically what was happening. And I remember how we were manipulated and deceived back then. So what I'm trying to do now is correct, try to go a different direction from that manipulation and deception. The American people, I believe America at heart are decent people. They are capable of compassion.
Absolutely.
But we've been misled by our governments, and it's not just Donald Trump. I mean, this has gone across. It's been Trump, it's been Biden, it's been Obama, it's been Bush, and it's been Clinton. All of them have been sort of slaves of the deep state. And in the course of that, continuing to get us involved with wars we don't need. I want Americans to get sick of war, sick of invading other countries. Let's promote life. Let's promote something that benefits people instead of takes them away.
Yeah. Wow. That's a beautiful statement right there. And for all our viewers watching, we're going to drop all the links to Larry's website, YouTube channel, Substack, everything that you need to know so that you can follow along. And Larry, of course, we've received great feedback. Definitely would like to have you back on the show again in the future. So let's stay in contact. And
yes,
and again, I just I really appreciate your insights. And I couldn't agree more with that last message. I want to end our show today with that, is that, guys, we only have one world and we only have one world, right? So we have to find a way that we work together, embrace our differences. We're going to have different religions, different cultures, different nationalities, but we only have one world. We're all humans. We've got to find a way to make it work. And I couldn't agree with you more that we just need to keep educating our American public and the world about what's going on and trying to bring peace. So thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
My pleasure.